From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
My name is Steve Winnick, and we're here at the Library of Congress with Billy McComiskey and his friend Myron Bretholtz and his son Sean McComiskey. And we're here to talk about Billy's career in music, and it's on an occasion that's sort of a dual occasion. Number one, we're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress, and Billy was one of the performers who played at the party celebrating our creation back in February of 1976. So we're very happy to have Billy here for that reason. And the second reason is, this hasn't been announced yet, but by the time this video is available, it will be. Billy is a recipient this year of the National Endowment for the Arts National Heritage Fellowship Award. And we're really happy to have Billy here to sort of continue to document his life and his career as a musician. And of course, we're very happy also to have Myron, who's been active in Irish music for all these years alongside Billy, and Sean, because one of the reasons for having this concert was to show how the tradition had continued to develop over 40 years, and we thought there was no better symbol of that than to have Billy here with some of his children who also play Irish music. So welcome to all three of you.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
And I guess we'll start with some general questions for Billy. I know your music career started in your original hometown, which was Brooklyn, New York. So talk a little about Brooklyn and that scene.
We started kind of right at the beginning. My grandfather immigrated out from Ireland, from Neenah, near Neenah, let's put it that way. He was actually from Newport in Tipperary, and his wife was from Castle Connell, which was in County Limerick. And so their daughter, May McComiskey, that would be my mom. So she was actually the first of the Brooklyn, of our Brooklyn family. She was the first daughter. She had two brothers, one older and one younger, and they were all crazy mad in love with Irish traditional music, and it had an awful lot to do. Nora was just a great mother, but it was my grandfather was Andrew Capeless from Newport in County Tipperary, and he was a lovely fiddle player. The great Larry Redigan from Dublin came to visit my grandfather. As soon as he landed in New York, he found my grandfather, and he just wanted to meet him and talk a little bit about the music. So it was kind of like that. We grew up in a row house. I don't know how. My grandmother did it first, right in the depths of the Depression. Somehow or another, they bought a house right in a neighborhood called Windsor Terrace in Brooklyn. And my mother was just, she was just so close and just loved her parents so much. We ended up living exactly right next door to them, which is no easy feat. Brooklyn's a tough town. She met my father. She met my father in the Catskill Mountains. Her brother had I'm slipping. You'll have to edit that a little bit. A boarding house. He had a boarding house called the Overlook in the Catskill Mountains, and my father had come out from Northern Ireland. My father was an Irish Catholic from Northern Ireland, and he chose to defend the crown during the Second World War. He had a good talk with his father, and they agreed that what was going on in Northern Ireland, what the British were doing to the Irish Catholics, the natives of the island, just wasn't right. But it was nowhere near as bad as what was going on in Nazi Germany. So somehow or another, my father actually became a pilot for the Queen's Royal Air Force, and he came out to Oklahoma to train, and he made a pact with himself that if he survived the war, he would make his way back to Oklahoma, or maybe just America, but he kind of, well, I'd really like to get back to Oklahoma. When he got one look at it, all of this land that was here, and all you had to do was work for it, and you could do anything you wanted. I loved what he would talk about when he first came out here, because as a member of the old world, Northern Ireland, it just wasn't the case. So he did. He came out. He only made it as far as Brooklyn. He was staying at his aunt's house, and there was a burnt out house down the street from her house, and he just couldn't stand it, and he bought it. So he was in Brooklyn, and he had decided, there was a couple there on the street, and they said, could you bring us up? We're going to stay in the boarding house in the Catskill Mountains. Could you drive us up there? And he did. He went with his best friend, Pat Thompson, and Pat McComiskey, hopped in their 39 Chevy and drove up to the Catskill Mountains. And there was Matt Capeless, and he says, you two fellas should stay over tonight, because there's a great box player in town, and there was a bunch of women playing badminton out in the lawn, and he says, and you have your pick of the Catskills right there. You can have anyone. And my father said, I like that one. And this guy says, oh, no, not that one. So that's my mother that my father picked. And his best friend, Pat Thompson, picked Kathleen Thompson, his wife. And they all kind of stayed in Brooklyn. So there was this lovely little community. The box player that they went out to hear that night was Joe Durain, who he's been such an inspiration. I listened to Joe's music in the house. My mother had all of Joe's records. My Uncle Matt played the accordion. He couldn't play like Joe Durain, and he adored Joe Durain. And so it's amazing, these crazy little connections. But there was always great music there in Brooklyn. My grandmother, after my grandfather passed away, I never got to meet my grandfather, but my grandmother and my mother would take me up to 39th Street and Fifth Avenue to the Rainbow Cafe on a Sunday, and we would go down to the back room in the basement, and Patty Sullivan, the Kerry fiddler, would be down there. And and as soon as I came in, and it was 25 cents to get in to the Irish Music Club, and he would come up to us, and he would say, Mrs. Capeless, you don't have to pay. It was 25 cents, and that was a lot of money for my grandmother. And he would bring us in, and we would get to just listen to the great musicians that were living in and around Brooklyn in those days. There's an awful lot of mostly fiddle players and flute players. It was just it was a lovely thing. Sometimes we'd save the money for the bus, and we'd walk it. When my grandmother was younger, we'd walk around Greenwood Cemetery. So that's kind of how Brooklyn was, and I guess in those times, my grandmother would not let my grandfather go out to play in the Irish bars. During the Depression, she would not let that happen, because here in Washington now, with the Dubliner or the Irish Times or the Four Provinces, all these beautiful Irish restaurants, that was not the case in Brooklyn when my grandfather was hanging out there. It was like you kind of had to know how to fight, and you kind of had to know how to run, and it was just kind of how Brooklyn was, and it was there wasn't a whole lot to do with Irish music at the time. We're talking about very modest people. We were the Latino-speaking people of their day. I don't know if that's not the right way to phrase that, but we were the downtrodden. Just kind of coming out of this whole traumatic experience with colonialism, and all that, and just trying to figure their way through the war for independence over in Ireland. So it was pretty hard for that generation of people that were coming out in those days. You could see how relieved they were to get to America. Lovely, quiet people.
So how about when you were growing up a few years later? Was the music, had it taken off a little bit more in Brooklyn?
I didn't realize it at the time, but the music was actually on the verge of extinction. There was very, very little of it left. My Uncle Matt and my Uncle Andy were on a mission. They went and found the bars in the Catskill Mountains that would host the great musicians of the time. There would be fellas, song and dance kind of guys that would be playing in these guys' places, and my Uncle Matt would be determined to get the likes of maybe Paddy Kaloran, the great Sligo player, maybe get him a gig, or just when he was somehow or another he was able to get Joe Cooley to come up to my godfather's bar. Again, I might have been like 11 or 12 years old. So you would go, and nobody was paying these people to do this. They would go because they would go because Joe Cooley was there. Bobby Gardner, the great Clare box player from Lisdoon Varna, after he won the All Ireland, he ended up in the Catskills because he wanted it. He wanted to hear Joe Cooley. So it's funny how it was this inside kind of thing. It was like it was before the internet, but there was somehow they were able to communicate the Boston players, the New York players, and that was kind of it. Boston, New York, maybe Chicago. In these little, modest little Irish communities, there would be these unbelievably talented players. I was stunned and mortified to learn that the great Joe Heaney, the great Shawano singer, actually lived in Bay Ridge. He wasn't even 10 minutes from my house, but we just didn't know. We didn't know. It wasn't until the National Council for the Traditional Arts that we realized we were in the presence of genius. It was an amazing thing that happened. People like Larry Redigan. Larry Redigan actually would have gotten to play on the Ed Sullivan Show. He would have played for the McNiff Dancers, maybe with Jerry. I think he played with Jerry Wallace, the pianist from Northern Ireland. And that would be a really great gig. He wouldn't get any money for that. There was no money in playing Irish traditional music. And there were just a few old men that were just incredibly good, you know. And it was kind of, the funny thing was, it was the same in Ireland. I'd get over there. When I finally had the money, when I had my little job in the Bank of New York, I managed to come up with enough money for my airfare, and all I had to do was get over there, and in between my relatives who also loved the music, all the Limerick players and people, family, and then the people that just loved the music. So all I had to do was come up with the airfare. I could get to stay for 3 weeks, and again, my Uncle Matt, he'd be a couple of steps ahead of me, trying to figure out, well, maybe we can go to Fecal tonight. Maybe a couple of the old fellas, or maybe we can find some of these guys. Maybe Matty Ryan will be in town in Tulla. Maybe we can work this out. So this was say 1969, 1970, and for where I was standing, to me it just looked like this little secret, this beautiful little jewel, you know. And I was too young to realize that it would almost vanished.
Mm-hmm. Well, so at some point before this, you actually started to play, and you started to play. You've been mentioning the box,
Right.
And of course that's typically the button accordion,
That's right.
typically BC tune like yours.
Maybe not. I guess the tuning kind of came later, but we would be. I like it here. Hey, I like that squeeze box, but the Irish never really called it a squeeze box. It would be a box or a melodeon. You know, it's another lovely expression. My cousin John Sweeney really admired my Uncle Matt, so he went in the Navy. He was in the Navy. His mother passed away, so he had to fend for himself. He went into the Navy, and he went to Germany, and he decided to bring back an accordion. And just completely out of the blue, he bought what's called a Hohner Black Dot, which happens to be a BC semitone button accordion. It's an interesting thing that an Englishman, of course I can't think of his name, back around 1910, discovered that if you take two old scales, two major scales, two diatonic scales, if they are half a step apart, you more or less have the full circle of fifths. It doesn't make for a great harmony playing instrument, but it's just ideal for the lovely way that the Irish tradition, Irish music is kind of like pre-G clef. It's pre-chromatic. It's a diatonic kind of music. So when they figured out, if you take, it's kind of like what the Cajun fellas play. It's exactly the same, except there's two rows, and one would be a half step apart from the other one, or up in Quebec, those little single roll accordions. So you get that lovely pulse. But when it's a semitone like that, it's a little bit more capable.
Yeah. Well, it helps you play in more keys, so you can play with other people, among other things.
Well, again, like Irish music is, we don't really know how old it is. My friend Jerry O'Sullivan made a couple of, he's a great piper up in New York, scholar, and he did a couple of recordings that he just called O'Sullivan Meets O'Farrell. Right. So the O'Farrell collection was like the early 1700s. O'Carolan's music is mixed in there. And I guess the amazing thing about this, we would, Patrick Street, what is it, what's the name of the record? Fisher's.
Oh, Fisher Street that I mentioned today, right, yep.
Did a whole bunch of tunes from,
right, that's right.
From this O'Farrell collection. And the amazing thing about it is you listen to these lovely old tunes from the O'Farrell collection, you immediately think, oh, that sounds like so-and-so. You know, that sounds just like that other tune. But it turns out the other tune might have been written 200 years after this one from the O'Farrell collection.
Right.
So this stuff is really, really old. It might not be as old as the music from the Middle East, or maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not an ethnomusicologist or a folklorist, but it goes back there, and it exists in these beautiful modes that the pipers are able to interpret, and it goes up like a do re mi. So there's whole steps and half steps, and the little modes that exist in around there. So the pipers play these tunes, and it's those little blind spots in the pipes that kind of identify the music. It makes it sound the way it does. It's like the little blind spots, little open strings on the fiddle and stuff like that. So this is what the people that were composing this music, I don't think we even regard it as composing. We'd kind of be more talking about making up a tune. You know, you wouldn't really say compose. You know, it's too fancy for Irish music, because we regard it as a folk music, as a people's music.
So one thing that you tend to mention when you mention an Irish musician's name is where that person was from. So let's talk about the regions a little bit and how that influenced the music, or in your experience anyway.
I'd be kind of identified as more or less loosely defined as an East Galway style accordion player. And the reason that would get a little dicey is the Irish accordion, as I understand it, came into being. It started to exist in and of itself someplace around maybe 1950. The instrument that Paolo Soprani built, well, there was this black dot Hohner accordion, but it wasn't complete. They hadn't quite figured out how to help the left hand to accompany these tunes. So Paolo Soprani took this idea from Hohner. Paolo Soprani from Castelfidardo, before, and maybe even, I don't know about during, but definitely after World War II, Paolo Soprani from Castelfidardo was considered like a national hero, because he was one of these people who was able to get his countrymen employed. You know, we were talking about the Chinese fiddle maker, and it's kind of, it's a beautiful craft, you know, being able to just come up with these little simple, inexpensive little bits of things and put them together so that these lovely, regular, common people can make this beautiful music. It's just a lovely gift. So, so I don't know. So somehow in the course of that, in around 1950, this Irish-style accordion, this Italian accordion, just became adopted by the Irish people. And there'd be a couple of different semitones. There's two basically there's a B, C, and a C sharp D. Joe Cooley would have played a C sharp D. So he would be from Peters Well in East Galway. Paddy O'Brien, this is where it gets a little dicey. Paddy O'Brien is from Neenah in County Tipperary. So it'd be like more of a, it would be, if you were cycling from Neenah up into Galway, it would take you a little while. But this is kind of what happened. When they talk about this East Galway style, it's not particularly accordion music. It's the music that existed in East Galway, what the fiddle players would play. The great Paddy Fahey, that's still alive, a very prolific composer, would be writing these absolutely stunning, beautiful tunes. Sometimes it would be like you'd take this scale, maybe a Mixolydian scale, or he'd kind of combine a major scale with this modal one, and get all this beautiful stuff going on with the fiddle. And the flute players ended up having to resort to chromatic flutes. So the old Irish players would have the 6-hole diatonic flute, the transverse flute, and all of a sudden it became borderline chromatic. It was like a really interesting thing that happened, and the accordion players picked up on it. So it would have been maybe Joe Cooley would be, he's the person that everybody immediately thinks of with East Galway music, and Kevin Keegan, who was a BC player. Kevin Keegan adored the playing of Paddy O'Brien from Neenah. And Paddy O'Brien from Neenah is the man that kind of showed the way. He started creating a technique for the BC accordion. Joe Cooley was able to bring the accordion a step closer to the essence of the music, so that pipers and fiddlers would they wanted to play with Joe, and then Paddy took that, and the technique grew because of that. Kevin Keegan would never play in front of Paddy O'Brien. He just wouldn't. But he was able to be around Joe Cooley without being totally intimidated by it. And then shortly after that, so that's the groundwork set there. And then people like Raymond Rowland from the town of Loughrea, where Paddy Fahey would have met up with the great Paddy Carty, the flute player. Loughrea is just one of these great towns. So Raymond Rowland would be there, and then he ended up in London, and this whole thing started in London. The great Raymond Rowland Quartet was there. Liam Farrell. It's funny now, my daughter-in-law is married to the grand niece of Liam Farrell. She was Lisa Farrell. So there's all these really beautiful musical connections. So and then from Raymond Rowland came these mighty players. Sean McGlenn from the town of Teena, he actually played in one of the oldest of the gray Palo Soprani accordions. It was just a beautiful thing. He bought it from a tinker. His mother didn't talk to him for about a month after he bought this accordion. He paid £50 and gave the tinker a brand new accordion, and his mother was mad. And then she realized that he was right. So they kind of reflect. It kind of harkens back almost to where the Anglo-concertina is. It's very similar to that. And of course, the great Joe Burke, also from in around Loughrea. So there was a really incredible, really well-rooted, highly respected core group of these musicians in East Galway. So, and that's what I was really privileged to. John Joe Ford would be another one of these box players. Ned Coleman was one of the flute players near. The Ballinakil Cayley Band, the Leitrim Cayley Band, these beautiful dance bands that actually got a chance to record.
But it's probably fair to say that McGlynn was the most influential on you.
Oh,
Tell me about Sean McGlynn.
yeah, I have trouble talking about Sean. Sean was a carpenter, and by trade, and when he immigrated to Boston, and he met his wife there, Maura, and he just thought Maura had great style. Maura was also from Galway. Maura is still alive, and he had gone up to the Catskills. There was this one. Again, my godfather had a pub in the town of South Carroll, and my uncle was always coming up with these little schemes to get people to go, so he could make enough money to hang on to it. A bunch of kids, 6 or 7 kids. Pat Murphy, crazy, completely. And he was a great hurler, but he loved Irish traditional music, and he loved the Tulla Cayley band, and he was in love with Bridie Lafferty, the piano player, with the Tulla Cayley band. It was really, the stories would be hilarious, great fun. So one of these summers, I guess we'd either have it on Labor Day or the 4th of July. He'd have these gatherings, and the one that really stuck with me was the year that Joe Cooley was there. I was only about 11 or 12, and then we didn't get there the next year. But Joe Burke had just won his second All-Ireland Championship. Joe Burke was about 28 years old when he first came to North America. Very, very, very brilliant man, a great role model. A little crazy like a lot of us were. But he came to the Catskills, and just as the way things turned out, Sean was living in Boston, and he heard that Joe was going to be in the Catskills, so he made a point to get there. And in the process, he met my Uncle Matt, and they became fast friends. And my Uncle Matt played more in Durain style, as I said, but you could hear in McGlynn's music that it was really deeply rooted. You couldn't miss that about his music. He reminded me very much of Bobby Gardner when I first heard him, but again, different again. He just a tremendous store of music just floating around in his head. And my uncle wanted him so much to meet me that he actually gave him the down payment for a house in the New York area, just so he would just be down, just so we would kind of have a chance to meet him. And he came over to the house one day. My Uncle Andy brought Sean and Maura over to the house, and we were talking away. And I'd gotten kind of frustrated as I'd meet these players. Joe Cooley was an amazing man to meet. He would take the time to talk to a child, and I was only 11 when I met him, and it really had a big effect on me. But most of the guys were just young, and there'd be beer and a few shots, and it'd be a little crazy. I actually asked one of these players one time, "Could you show me how to do that?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, my hand hurts." And it was like a joke. And I thought, well, I'm never going to make that mistake again. So I'd watch players. I'd watch them play. But when Sean came over, he was just great. He's just a really great guy. And he told me that day in the house, he says, you're going to be a great player. I was so intimidated when I met him there that I actually went up to my room and did homework. This is not my style at all. It was like the only time I ever did that. And he came up, and he said, "You're going to be a great player." And it's funny, Joe Cooley told me that same thing. They were so anxious. It was so important to them to share this culture. And then as I got to know Sean, I went up to the Catskills, and there's Sean McGlynn at my uncle's house, and he had a pickup truck, and we went for a ride in the pickup truck, just driving around up in the mountains. And where do you live? And then next thing we stopped at the gas station. I remember this stuff. It was maybe 14 and a half years old, and it had a clutch in it. I was going, boy, this is terrific. And by the time we got back to the house, he was my best friend. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of how it was. So yeah, he was really something. He loved coming down. he loved coming down. When he met Dr. Maloney, I guess Mick was probably, I guess he had gotten his scholarship to do his graduate work over at Penn. I believe that's where you went. And Sean just loved coming down, and he'd come down and just enjoy the couple of pubs that we were working in, and then he got to play at the Bicentennial Folk Festival when Jimmy Carter was in. I mean, my God, think about the people that were there, the Irish that came out. It was I mean, just
So
the Irish.
you must have gone to that, right?
Mick got us. He got us to go, and we were like, we were doing the Dubliner gig, and we weren't well behaved at all, and we missed half of everything.
So we're talking
Very
about the
frustrated.
what's now the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, but then was the Festival of American Folklife.
Yeah.
In 1976 was a particularly big festival because of the
It was
bicentennial.
unbelievable. And the great Junior Crean came out from Milltown, Malbay, and Sean was the featured box. It was great that I was his student there, but Sean was the box player. They brought Dennis Duty, the great Kerry box player, out as well, and Day Dannon. Michael Flatley was actually the featured dancer. It was like, what is going on here? You know, and we were very lucky at the time, just playing there in the Dubliner, and thank goodness nobody got hurt.
Right.
You know, there's no harm done, really, I don't think.
Right. So, but before that happened, I mean, you had to, first of all, so you met McGlynn and became good friends.
He was my mentor. He was my best friend, and he was my best man. Yeah.
And did you take formal lessons with him, or did you just watch him play and play alongside him?
There was no such thing as getting a formal lesson for the Irish accordion at the time, which is really something. In Brooklyn, there were a bunch of, not a bunch, but a few Italian immigrants that were able to play the accordion. So there were a bunch of young kids playing Lady of Spain on the piano accordion. I never quite got that. I didn't want to do that. But I just loved the way McGlynn played. He said there's a certain roughness in it, he says, and the people like that. And he was a very strong man, but the tips of his fingers were very small. He had great dexterity in his hands. And he loved continental accordion music. I mean, if you heard the great jazz players now, the great chromatic jazz players, I mean, all over the place and all this stuff going on. And there was a book called The Bourbon Method. So you could open this book and set it there, and he could da 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 dum da 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 dum da 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 and he just, isn't that lovely? And then he was able to read it. He went to Mario Taka was the great accordionist in the upstate New York area, and Sean would drive up there for a lesson when he had the time, and he got a continental accordion, and he loved that technique that the Italians had figured out for the continental accordion. But there really wasn't technique for the Irish accordion. And Sean said, oh, well, it's great for the Irish music, but it's just a toy. It's not a real instrument. And I guess in a way, he's kind of right. You know, I guess that's true. It's older, it's an older type of music, and there was no technique. But that kind of sparked me. I remember sitting in my uncle's house up in Leeds, and Sean's wife and the Leonards and my uncle, they were all down in Gil Feather's Sligo house and having a great time with the show bands, and it was great fun. And Sean and I were sitting in the kitchen talking away. You could hear the crickets outside, the screen and the door, the moths coming up against the door, and the little things you could hear going on out there. And we were sitting there trying to figure out the fingering for a tune that was written by the great Martin Wynne from Sligo, who lived in the Bronx. And we were trying to, the fiddle player, we were trying to figure out and we just sat there trying to figure out how to cover about an octave and a half, and about 8, 9 notes to get down there. How are you supposed to do that? And we finally figured it out, and Sean says, he says, there's the difference right there. And I said, what's that? He says, there they are. They're all down there in the bar, and they're having a great time singing and dancing. And here we are, worried about one note. And there's just a great, there's just great logic to that.
There's a lesson in
So
that.
so he had a great love for technique, and he was fascinated by it. And he didn't show me so much. He would already go, how do you think we should, how could you, after we knew each other for a little while, how do you think, what would you do there? And we would sit and just figure out these finger patterns, kind of like dancing. Like instead of using 2 feet to dance, you have 4 fingers. It's kind of nice. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned McGlynn's beautiful accordion, and if I'm not mistaken, you inherited that. Is that?
I did. We had an argument one night. We had we had a little bit too much to drink when the first Greenfields tour came to this area, and they were performing at Georgetown University, and it was a great night. And back in those days, they'd stay with whoever would put them up, and they all got kind of bored, so they decided one by one they would say, Billy, could I come over? You think I have room at your an apartment? So I ended up with the whole Greenfields. The first
Was there
Greenfields.
like 12 people in that? Or?
Yeah, Liz Carroll, Michael Flatley, Donnie Golden. It might have been the second Greenfield tour. I forget. Sean McGlynn, Jack Cohen. Who else? It was a great piper. Of course, Mick was out paving the way while the other guys were partying like way too much. And so we got in an argument, Sean and I, about who loved who more.
It's pretty adorable.
Yeah.
Who won?
And he said, well, okay, he says, you think you love me. He says, the day I die, you're getting my gray accordion. And that was the end of the argument.
Yeah.
That was it. And Flatley, Michael Flatley was like, come on, where's the gray accordion? They were having 902s. They had gone to Jamaica.
702.
702s.
Sorry.
Were you there for that?
I named the drink.
So you named it. So they'd take a bottle of rum and Coca-Cola and a scoop of ice cream.
gosh.
And they were talking about these 702s, and then Sean actually made one with all the drama. You'd think you were watching one of these cooking shows on public television.
Jack was in on that too. It was Jack and Mike and Sean.
And the big scoop of ice cream plopped right in the middle of it, and we all thought it was terrific. 702s. So, yeah.
All right.
So no one he would never, ever think, nobody. Well, there were a couple of fellas, Martin Mulvihill, again, another national heritage recipient. I played for years down here with Brendan Mulvihill, still one of my best friends. But Martin managed to make a modest living teaching Irish music. And my friend Maureen Glenn inherited her father's music school. There was another fellow, Pete Kelly from Galway, and he did pretty good at it too. But Sean would never, in a million years, take any money from anybody if they wanted to learn Irish music. It was not an issue. It just wasn't. It wasn't how it was done.
Right. So did you, when you were living in New York, did you know Martin? Did you know of his teaching and all of that, that was going on? Because I remember when I was growing up, he was still active, but he must have been active.
Oh, Martin's a great guy.
Yeah.
Martin was such a gentleman. From Glynn. Yeah, and he had a natural gift. He's kind of like Mick Gavin. That's how Mick Gavin from County Clare. Sean is great friends with Mick's sons. Mick would be about my age, but he's one of these gentlemen. He's a lovely fiddle player. He's a nice box player in the Cooley style of just the detuning, and he could get an old tune out of a whistle or a flute. But he's kind of like Mitch Fanning, who's right here.
Right.
He's one of these people that is just so generous with his art, with this music. He doesn't allow himself to impede, a student's growth. So, you know, Gavin is that way. But Martin Mulvihill he would just groom these students. It was all the competitions were gaining in importance. My nieces are all into these competitions now. But you had a really good chance back in those days if you were a student of Martin Mulvihill's, you were gonna do all right. Huge repertoire, a huge store of music, and really highly regarded and respected in Ireland. You know, Martin Mulvihill's hilarious.
Yeah. So at some point you ended up moving first to the Washington area, and then you settled in Baltimore.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did you come to Washington first?
Well, it started a little bit before that. Johnny Cronin from Guineguila, from County Kerry, a Slieve Lucre player, the brother of Paddy Cronin. Paddy Cronin is probably, he's arguably the most renowned of the fiddlers of our time. He passed away recently. It wasn't that he was a whiz kid or something, but Paddy just played the music so right. You know, it was like so close to what it is. And so Johnny was a sandhogger in New York, and he was great friends with Joe Cooley. And he was, again, a hilarious kind of guy, and a bit of a drinking problem, I guess you would say, but a huge heart, very generous man. And he said to me, "Billy, you'll come and my Irish accent is no that. Billy, you'll come and you'll play in the Bunratty pub with me, and they'll give you $50 and all the Heineken that you could drink." And this was like unheard of, that you could go out on a Friday or a Saturday night and play, and people would be in there. They wouldn't like tell you to be quiet.
They pay you.
The pay part was unheard of.
Right.
You know, the only place we ever played was in the basements, in the back, where we weren't bothering anybody. So to be playing in, on a stage, and as I started to cut my teeth there, I ended up filling in for Joe Burke, with Andy McGann. Andy McGann and Joe Burke and Felix Dolan created the sound that Irish music still has to this very day. Myself and Joni Madden, Brian Conway, and Brendan Dolan, we have a recording out to Pride of New York, and they talk about this Irish style. So it's Joe Burke and Andy McGann and Felix Dolan. So all this crazy stuff was going on in the Bunratty pub, or maybe they would go out and play Cayley's or something like that. But this was a real gig in an Irish bar that, I would say, for the 2 years that I played there, maybe 3 or 4 really fantastic fights. The immigrants. There was one night, these two guys were arguing about who was the better football team. Was it the Irish football? Was it the Longford team? Or was it the Roscommon team? Whatever they were arguing about. And they started the fight, but they were gentlemen, so they brought the fight outside. And and then, and it's kind of tragic. They went out and they go down to they found a vacant lot so they wouldn't be disturbing the traffic, and they had the fight. And then finally one of them won, and the other one was dead. Oh. So this was kind of new. This was the real Irish bar.
Yeah.
And so it was a pretty funny time. One night, Johnny Cronin, I went in looking for Johnny, and I found him asleep under one of the tables. It was great. He had an expression that, the ceiling in this house is very low, isn't it? So he was pretty funny. He was a pretty funny guy. But I was in there playing in the bar, and there was a fiddler, an Irish-American fiddler named Jack Reardon, and you wouldn't know if he was an Irish-American, and you wouldn't know. An Irish-American might be an immigrant that's a citizen, or it might be the child of an immigrant. It was kind of shady. But I kind of think Jack was, I think he was an Irish-American, and he played the fiddle. And his daughter, Peggy Reardon, was a lovely fiddle player too, and she knew all the fellows like in the various Cayley bands that would come out, the old Liverpool Cayley band. She knew all these guys. But Lou, so Peggy came up to the Bunratty on a quiet kind of night, and she brought this fellow with her, and she said, "This is my friend Lou Thompson," and she brought this guy to meet me. They'd come up. Peggy wasn't living in the Bronx for a while. I said, "So how are you doing? Where'd you go?" "Oh, I went to Washington." "Oh, that's nice. How do you like Washington?" And the next time it's here, well, I live in I live in Virginia. I was going, "I thought you lived in Washington." I didn't do well in geography. She said, "I thought I live in Virginia." Oh, next time I said, "Oh, I live in Washington," or "I live in Maryland." I was going, "Wow, she's really moving around." I didn't realize she was just hopping around this tri-state area. And she said, so she said, "Why don't you?" She introduced me to this Father Lou Thompson, a priest who was stationed here, I guess they would say. He was in a pretty kind of progressive Catholic order. I think it was a very small order. And he actually did his undergraduate work in community organization. So he was a really interesting character. And again, he played kind of in this style that Joe Derain played, the old Walters and Baldoni accordion. So she wanted me to meet Father Lou, and he said, "Why don't you come down to Washington sometime, and we can have a Cayley, and you can come down and see what it's like." So I did, and I got to fly from LaGuardia into National Airport. So if you can picture LaGuardia, I drove across the Bronx, through Queens, with all that stuff going on, and made it to LaGuardia, left the car there, paid a fortune at parking, just the whole experience you'd want to know. And I got off at National Airport, and it was sort of like the Wizard of Oz movie. All of a sudden, everything's in color, and it's like, what's all this going on here? And she picked me up in a brand new 1976 Chevy Malibu. Yeah. I remember that. And we drove up along the Potomac, and I was going, what's going on? And we went, and I played the Cayley, and I met the Winch brothers, Jesse and Terry Winch, and of course Peggy had Terry, and they are from the Bronx too. Jesse and Terry were both very, very well educated, very, very intelligent men. Terry's a poet and a box player, and Jesse's a lovely Bowron player. And there was a couple of other guys. Mark Quinn played the accordion. He was from Rockaway. Mark had actually got tired of living in New York, and he went to the train station, and he goes, "I have $50. He said to the guy, "Where can you go?" And the guy said, "You could go to Washington." So he did. And he went into the bar on 13th Street, Matt Cain's. He told the cabbie, "Is there an Irish bar?" And they brought him to Matt Cain's. And he went in, and he found his way. He became a resident with his accordion. So they had this little nucleus. And I guess they were talking about it. What do you think we can do to get the real music here? Because Peggy was homesick for the music. And so they invited me. That's kind of what happened. I came down and played the Cayley, and I told Father Lou, I said, if you can swing me a job down here, a clerk's job or something, I'll come down. And it was right then that this Irish pub phenomenon was starting to take shape. It was between Guinness and Harp breweries, they came up with this idea where you could have an Irish-themed bar, and it would be just like Dublin and blah, blah, blah. And they called it the Dubliner, and it's terrific. And Matt Cain's was the first. There was another one in New York, the John Barleycorn. I played there in Midtown Manhattan. It looked like a little pub, but it was in the middle of Manhattan. But the Dubliner was like serious business. And I guess at that point on Capitol Hill, it was like, look kind of tough. We never had any trouble there, but it was kind of more postal workers and stuff hanging around there. There was nothing cool about it, except that the Capitol building was right there. But we really had a tremendous amount of fun. And these various I guess the other thing that was so cool about it was people like Alan Jabor, am I saying that one right? Who's
Rensler.
Ralph Rensler, Mick Maloney again was coming back and forth and working on his degree at Georgetown. So there was these really interesting folklorists and ethnomusicologists, because it was like a whole new thing. And I was there. I was playing with Brendan Mulvihill. I asked Brendan Mulvihill to come down. Brendan especially at that time, he was one of the very best Irish fiddlers in Irish music, of these young Irish players. And Andy O'Brien.
And we should say he was the son of Martin Mulvihill,
son
the
of
great
Martin
teacher
Mulvihill,
that we were talking about.
And so that's kind of how we came down. And then Lou wanted to start a music school, and we did.
Well, you would also just were about to mention Andy O'Brien and how he got involved.
Andy O'Brien was from Kerry, kind of like Johnny Cronin. And Johnny told me, he says, "You have to meet Andy O'Brien. He's a great singer and he is a lovely guitar player." And my friend Pat Keogh and I needed a guitar player one night up in the Bronx before I moved down. And I asked Andy to do the gig. And it was the first time I ever played for money anywhere in New York City where anybody actually clapped. And it was Andy got to play with people like Johnny Leary or Dennis Murphy. He was from this whole Slieve Lucra thing that was going on in County Clare. But at the same time, he was stone mad for the Scottish song tradition. The Scots were like really, really interested with this dad-gad tuning on the guitar. Archie Fisher, Andy O'Brien.
Dick Gahan.
Between Archie Fisher and Dick Gahan, and Andy Irvine was kind of this, with the playing Steve, or this whole thing that was going on. Andy was like a huge fan of that, and he had come out. Andy wanted to get a job as a welder when he came out, and he was just about ready to give up when I called him. In fact, the first week that we played in the Dubliner, Andy used a subway token. And
From New York, because there was no subway in D.C.
yeah,
that.
he used a subway token to do the gig. And when we got paid, we got $300. It was really very big money at the time, we thought anyway. And Andy counted it and counted it. And I said, "Andy, what are you going to," because he was from County Kerry, there's nothing there. There was cows, man. We're talking Kerry. Woo. And he was counting it like that. I said, "Andy, what are you going to do with all your money?" And he says, "I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a pick."
Nice.
He was using the subway token. He never let on.
So one of the tricks to that, by the way, is if you have a whole bunch of tune players on the stage, the music never stops, so no one can ever clap. But if you have a singer, that song's going to end, right? So.
Yeah, I guess the cool thing about it was to survive in the bar scene, and none of us were, it's a kind of, it's a trade, it's a skill, Seamus Kennedy is a crackerjack down there, very funny.
The Henny Youngman of Irish music.
And again, he's also one of these guys with this phenomenal repertoire of songs, but he can identify immediately with the crowd. Andy and Brendan and I, we just sat there and played, and it was kind of rough going for a little while. And Pat Troy, one of the publicans in Georgetown, remember he had the bar in Georgetown, he had a radio show, and he came in, he says, "You guys are going to have to jazz it up. You got to get them to clap along and this kind of stuff." So we added a little bit of theatrics to it, and we had to do songs that would be associated with Irish bars, Irish drinking songs, no nay never songs, and this kind of stuff. And then, but every once in a while, the way it evolved in the Dubliner, because of all these other goings on, people coming in and out, it kind of, people started realizing that Andy was, really good. So there was a really interesting thing that went on in the Dubliner back then, in the mid-'70s. Especially, Myron had a WGTB, and he would be
College radio station of the era.
Yeah, so it was like totally awesome. What time was that? And
It was 12 noon on a Sunday for 3 hours, and it was college radio, free form, no formulas, nobody making dictates on what we should play. And I said, well, I'll have a folk music show. But I like all kinds of folk music, and I'd have my own folk records, and it was records, vinyl, pre-CD.
And it was just so...
I'd play a few Irish, and then the phones would light up. Play more of that. I didn't have more of that, but I got the bug, and I got more of that. So it built up from there. That was more or less my introduction to it through that.
Well, it was interesting. I was over at the Smithsonian a couple of weeks ago listening to some tapes of the Irish Tradition, which was
Yeah.
the group that you
That's right.
and Andy and
We thought that name
Brendan
was
had
good.
formed. They were tapes from the Smithsonian Folklife Festival.
Wow.
And one of the members of one of the lineups there was Myron here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, if it was, in '86, they had an anniversary, 10th year anniversary of the festival. And at that point, the Irish Tradition was a 5-piece, including the people you mentioned, as well as Chris Norman.
Chris Norman was
flute
there
player.
as well. Yeah.
And we were fortunate enough and privileged enough to play that festival for those 2 weeks in '86.
And it was kind of the start. Linda Hickman would have been one of the first. She might have been the first flute player to actually, just want to play the music. It's one thing to play the flute. If you want to play a flute at a contra dance, let's say, that's one thing. That's not what Irish flute playing is. Distinct.
It's very specific.
There's Galway style. There's the Galway style. Galway, Clare, and really Roscommon and Mayo and Sligo. These are real great flute places. So Linda would have been maybe the first one to take an interest in it. There's a good few folks taking an interest in the fiddle too. How could you not?
Right.
Here at the foothills of the Appalachians, it's amazing. There's another whole story there with Sean. But so Dr. Frank Claudy, I think he's a Washingtonian, right? I think.
Correct.
And he decided he wanted to go to medical school. He had some kind of regular old job, and he decided he wanted to go to medical school. But he came in with a whistle one day, and then the next day he had some kind of recorder thing and trying to play. And I was using my Brooklyn humor. I said, why don't you get yourself a flute and start playing some real music? And I'll be darned, he did. So he ended up with the Black Transverse flute. And Chris Norman kind of came out of that. And Chris has had a pretty interesting career. He's a brilliant musician. But he was, right from here. They just honored Linda Hickman up in the New York area. Keolta Skeltori Aaron would have their annual gathering, and they'll pick Brendan Dolan this time, and Brendan Dolan and Linda. And it's just a lovely thing. And they didn't even know that, Linda's been living up there for 25 years, and nobody really asked her, where
Right.
did she learn how to play? And she learned right here.
Here.
Right here in
Yeah,
Washington.
they're the latest Hall of Fame recipients up there for Mid-Atlantic, CCE. Good for them. Good for them.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, that's another sort of second generation story because Brendan is the son of Felix, whom you were
That's
mentioning
right.
before, one of the great accompanists of all time in Irish music on the piano. And Brendan is too now. I mean,
Outstanding.
Brendan, when Felix came up with with that style of accompaniment, there was, if you listen to the old Michael Coleman records, they'd have to have a union musician in the
Yeah.
studio, so there's some pretty god-awful piano playing on there.
They were reading in front of them, and they never seen it till that day.
There was a joke going around that they were able to isolate the piano accompaniment and made a record out of that, and it was going to be a really big hit. It was kind of sadomasochist kind of people. Horrible stuff. But but Felix just heard it. He heard the spot where Irish music exists, and he was able to show the world how much he loved it. It was a really kind of, and he actually used this 1-6-2-5, and Heart and Soul, that thing.
Right.
And he was actually, he told me he was papering a room in his house, and he heard that, and he goes, oh, I'm going to see if I can work that into a tune, and he did. So you can hear it
And it
there.
worked.
You can hear it on a tribute to Michael Coleman. It's like, man, really, really great. And it caught on in Ireland.
That's a whole other discussion too about the role of accompaniment in Irish music. That's for another day.
Right.
But Felix made it okay to do that because it has been, in some cases still is, frowned upon. It's melody. Melody only, and accompaniment doesn't belong there, according to some purists.
It's like the tunes would have like a harmonic inference, let's say. So depending on how the the melody will flow, and it's really lovely to hear. What's the brilliant guy with the Bothy band? I always have trouble thinking of his name.
Oh, Donald Lunny.
Yeah, Donald Lunny.
Left.
Okay. Yeah, and he's able to. He made these Bothy band records, but he produced the record kind of like how a rock and roll producer would.
Right.
So he presented Irish music like rock. Actually, my own Outside the Box is kind of like that. Kind of like it's a good road trip record.
So here so now you're in a band with
These guys.
with Brendan and Andy, and that lasts for a while, like
Well,
10, 15 years, right?
Yeah, I think we managed to. We managed to survive in the Dubliner for about 3.5 years, and they were ready to move on. There was an influx of these singer, guitar player, entertainer types. So if you have you have a saloon on Capitol Hill, you want that square footage to generate X amount of dollars. So it made all the sense in the world. It's not a folk club. It's a bar. You have to get it takes players a little. There's no loyalty in this. It's a bar. Yeah. It's not the Smithsonian. It's not the National Count. It's a bar. That they can make money. And then they'll do these other things to try to make more money. So I guess then we played next door. Hugh Kelly was opening another bar. We played there for another 2 years, and somewhere in and around there, Lou and Peggy, the order that Lou was a priest in, or whatever, that he vowed, whatever Catholic stuff they do, and the order lost a whole pile of money on bad real estate holdings, so he was off the hook. He was done, and I guess they wanted him to sign up again. No, that's fine. So he married Peggy, and so he asked Brendan and Andy and me to play at the wedding, and we were a little late to the wedding because we were. Well, I guess we were probably still at the Dubliner at the time, yeah, and right before we got fired from there, and we got to play for them at the wedding, and they would teach Cayley dancing. Lou loved to teach Cayley dancing, and Peggy just loved everything about Irish culture. She just loved it. She's just a wonderful person. She was an actual Irish step dance teacher. She was accredited and all these kind of things. So they had all their after they had their wedding ceremony, and then we went to the hall and we had a lovely meal, and it was really nice. And Jesse and Terry and a few of the guys, we threw together a kind of wedding band. It was pretty funny. And then all of these really nice people showed up. And next thing, everybody's dancing all over the place. And it was all these people that Lou and Peggy had showed how to dance. And these two girls went by like that, and I said to Brendan, that's it. And one of them was my wife, Annie, from Baltimore. And it was like, no question about it. I was like, whoa, I got to try to get her attention. And she didn't care anything about it. Her sister, Franny, loved to go to the Cayleys.
Was that Franny with her that day? Or?
Franny asked her to go, so the two of them went. And the odd thing was they both learned to dance from Peggy. They learned to waltz from Peggy. So Annie danced like an Irish-American girl. And it was just unbelievable. But the other thing that was really funny about it was Peggy used to say, you should come up to Baltimore because there's a girl up there and you really should meet her because you'd really like her. I said, really? I said, what's her name? And she says, her name is Franny Caskey. And so after the wedding was over, how did you enjoy the wedding? I said, I met this it's great, I met this great girl. And her name is Annie Caskey. Isn't that the one? She says, no, we thought you were supposed. Franny. So they were off by one genome thing or something.
Right.
Whatever that stuff is.
Right.
One biological thing.
But-
it was really good. It took me a little while to get her attention, and then
Worked out.
she knew she was out of luck. She knew what are you going to do, you know?
So, yeah, I mean, as you said during the concert, without her, maybe, none of this would have happened,
Oh,
but
well, yeah,
certainly
she's
some
the-
of this wouldn't have happened.
She is
Technically speaking.
Right.
She is she's the rock. You know, you can ask
Yeah.
the boys. She works for the Sisters of Mercy at Mercy Medical Center in Baltimore, which was founded by the Sisters of Mercy on Bagot Street in Dublin. Her father was from the old 10th Ward up in Baltimore. They were the dirt poor, the poorest of the poor from the famine times. So yeah, they're a real, really great family. Her mother's a Polish American, and they're just a real lovely, good, solid church-going Baltimore family. I can completely love that. It's all about education and health, and kids.
Giving back to the community, for sure.
Oh.
And if
yeah,
I could
forget
put something there about Annie, which I've observed about many people, but Annie would be prominent, who follow the music. There are people who have instruments who aren't really musicians, but they have instruments. And I'm not naming names, no one anywhere in our vicinity, but they're out there, and God bless them. There are other people who don't have instruments. They're around instruments, but they don't play, but they're musicians through and through. And to me, Annie's Exhibit A. She's got more music in her than a dozen people. She doesn't have to play an instrument, but that's just mechanics.
Wait.
But she's got the music right here. How can she not, being around it? She knows it.
She was the one that spotted today here that we didn't have the concertina right on my knees, and she's going, there's something wrong there. We have to.
I mean, the sound of it.
Yeah.
No,
So and it was just a matter of getting another mic, but she brought that. We were thinking, oh, it's fine, but she heard it.
No,
You know,
her ear
yeah.
is as good as anybody who plays an instrument.
She connects. She connects people. It's really good. Our little community. Our little Irish music community. We call it the Celtic Corridor there
Right.
on Harford Road. There's a whole bunch of us that play there. And Annie is like, or what would Annie say about that? No, what do you think? She's like, doesn't.
Basically, if
She
Annie
thinks
says
she
it's
does.
good, it's good.
Yeah, she's tremendous.
You don't need a
physical.
second opinion. She would take her to the bank. That's what I think of Annie. I think all
So-
this.
Except she has zero interest in money. You know, it's not.
It's a figure speech. You know what I'm saying?
So I guess jumping off from discussing Annie and the fact that we had this concert specifically to showcase your children as well as your own playing, and we have Sean here. So let's talk to Sean for a minute and ask, what elements of your music did you draw from your dad's tradition, and what have you done with it that's different?
Well, I mean, he was my primary influence, as you can obviously imagine. I was not in a situation where I immediately wanted to play the accordion. When I was younger, I was kind of, which is a trend in my life that I've come to realize. I tend to be a bit of a late bloomer in terms of figuring out what I want. And I played piano. I learned piano from Donna Long before, and then took some fiddle lessons from Brian Conway, who I just saw this weekend, who made a funny joke. He was like, he said he likes to joke around on stage with you guys, that he's responsible for my playing the accordion, because
He's a
he
fiddle
gave
player,
me
huh? Yeah.
he gave me my very last fiddle lesson. And after that, I started playing. I kind of waffled for another couple months or years. I forget exactly how long. But I started playing the accordion in the Catskills with my cousin Noreen Murphy, outside of Stack's Pub in East Durham. And actually, it was John Redmond who taught me my first tune. I still tell him that. all the time.
Wexford man. Great man.
And from there, it just kind of organically happened. I was around it, and it came easily. So, and then I would kind of tag along and go to the Augusta Weeks and the Catskill Weeks. And there was a good 10-year stretch where I did that every year. So through that, I got hooked. I made a bunch of friends. I started meeting girls. And kind of once you experience that sort of dynamic, you kind of get roped in. And, you know, through that, obviously, I learned a lot of what very wide majority of my musical technique and style from him. And in recent years, I've kind of taken that and kind of gone in different directions with it, experimentally. Because one thing that I did when I was younger, I found to be sort of intimidating, growing up in the shadow, so to speak, of, you know, all this. And how do I kind of figure out what I want to do? Do I want to copy that, or do I want to do something else? And so I'm from Baltimore. I'm an American, and around me is a lot of American music. So some of the collaborations I've done in the past few years, in addition to my traditional Irish collaborations with people like Sean Gavin from Detroit and Tony Smith, his daughters, which there's a whole story that we didn't really cover.
There's 100.
Yeah.
For another day.
That's a tangent I'm trying not to go down. But, you know, I've taken what I've learned in my, you know, lessons or whatever you want to call it, from my father, and gone, you know, collaborations with people like Chris Styles Bacon. I don't know if people in the room know DC. Chris Styles Bacon is a, you know, resident DC hip-hop artist, and I've done a lot of stuff with him over the past few years, and playing different kinds of like go-go and jazz and hip-hop music, and playing more recently into Appalachian music and bluegrass and that sort of stuff. So,
Tell me your band name too for the record.
in the past couple of years, I've been playing with a group called Charm City Junction, which is the name, you know, is harkening back to Baltimore, the Charm City, and the junction point of all our different music coming together. So it's a collaboration with a bluegrass fiddle player named Patrick McAvinue, old-time banjo player Brad Clodner, who's the son of Ken Clodner, who's in Helicon with Chris Norman.
That's right.
And all that, and
Again,
jazz
old-time
bassist.
Cool.
A jazz bassist. So
He's very, what's his name?
Alex Lackamon. So he's a military rat. He comes from all over the place.
Everywhere.
Yeah. So it's kind of taken me all sorts of different places that I, you know. And one of the interesting things about that for me, I remember being a little kid, going to these festivals, and he would always say, you never know where the music is going to take you.
Yeah.
And wherever you go, you have a friend. So, and you know, between the past 5 and 10 years, I've, you know, toured in Germany with Josh Dukes, and played in Spain and all over the country here. And it's pretty interesting.
So, you know, one thing you were talking about these webs, and it was funny because when you brought up the Bothy Band, Billy, and we're asking what's the name of the guy, I thought you were referring to Michael O'Donnell because he added a lot of the harmonics to that.
All of those guys.
Although
are
obviously
like,
Donald was
He could have been either one. I picked Donald, but it would apply to me Hall too.
and the reason I
look at Kevin Burke.
yeah
God, and-
yeah but I thought of him because you know, you weren't in a band with Michael, but you were in a band with someone very closely associated with Michael early on, who was Dahi.
That's right.
And so that
They were
style of guitar
Scarra,
playing.
Bray, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about Trian, just because we didn't get to it.
Oh, I didn't even get to
and
Trian.
you mentioned
So
Liz
interesting,
from
yeah.
the stage today.
I remember being in, but before I moved down here, I went to a fesh in Manhattan, and we thought it was a really big thing. At the fesh, that's an Irish dancing competition thing, and there was a few musicians actually went to it, and a couple of friends of mine said, "There's some girl. She's tall. She's really crazy, and she's been asking. She wants to meet you." I said, "Really?" He said, "What's her name?" She said, "Oh, her name is Liz Carroll." I said, "Really?" I said, that sounds great, and I'll have to look." And she says, "Yeah, she's really tall. She's about 6 foot tall. I think she's a basketball. I think she's like a softball player. She's an athlete, you know." I said, "Really? That's really something." So we were just kind of walking around and having a few tunes. Eugene O'Donnell was there. Michael Flatley was there playing a tune. He sounded very much like Seamus Tansey. He plays in the Sligo. What's the great Sligo flute player that lives out in Chicago now?
Oh, Kevin Henry.
Kevin Henry. He was a student of Kevin
Yeah,
Henry's.
okay.
So I was looking for, I thought Mike Flynn was there. And it was this kid, Michael Flatley. And next thing, we're all on all these nuts. Everybody's on the elevator. You shouldn't have beer in the hotel because, you could get in trouble for having beer walking around. They're spilling it all over the rugs, and it was stupid and a big mess. And the doors open, and this girl, Patty Moriarty, a box player, very well educated, but again, totally crazy. Great person, Patty. Lovely player for the dances. And the doors open, and she goes, "There he is!" And this girl, she's about 6'2", and she goes, "Is that Ben?" And the doors closed. So that was the first time that I met Liz Carroll.
Almost.
I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And so I didn't see her again that weekend. And then something was going on here. One of those, there was a while when there was a fella, Sean, what the hell was Sean? Oh, Brian, Brian that's always with the concertina. Coakley. Sean Coakley got himself a little 3-year grant to have a folk festival. And we were going, somebody's got to give you money. This is, my Uncle Matt would have loved that, So he gets in, and he calls up. He says, who do you think is a good player? Who should we get? And I said, well, here, Liz Carroll's, she's really good. And next thing, she started being places. But the real big one, again, was the 1976, the Bicentennial Festival. There she was. Yeah. And it was like between herself and Michael, there was kind of, the rest of us were feeling a little rusty. We were going to have to start practicing a little bit. Liz is like, I think she's a genius. I think she would be the preeminent player, period. She's unbelievable. I don't even know how many solo recordings she has. But that's, and then, when I got married, I ended up in Baltimore, and then, I didn't want to be coming down here going crazy all the time and trying to figure out, how to be a man, And so we all kind of changed what we were doing. And one of the big things that I managed to do was I just stopped drinking. I thought, I love to drink, but I love to play more.
Yeah.
So I figured, okay, I think I'll just be a player. So I did my best with AA, and everything started calming down, realizing what a disaster I was and all this kind of stuff. And Liz was nesting in Chicago. She had a son and a daughter, great kids, really lovely, and her husband is terrific, and he was a carpenter, and he played blues, Charles Lacey.
Great blues harp player, harmonica.
And then she just gave me a call one day, and she says, "Billy, why don't we have a group?" And I said, "Well, okay, works for me." I had a little job. It was a little tough getting away, but I was starting to get little bits of vacation time, or maybe we could go on the weekends. And Dahi had come out with a box player from Awfully, again named Patty O'Brien, named the same as the great Patty O'Brien, but James Kelly was the fiddle player. So it was the three of them that came out, and the first time I heard them was at the Dubliner, and I was like, my Lord, the repertoire was really great. Patty was the box player in the Castle Cayley band. He took James Keene's seat when James immigrated to America. James Keene is the brother of Sean Keene from the Chieftains. So Patty came out, and I think it was, I got the feeling that it might have been James Kelly's idea. He had been out the year before on a Kiltus tour, and he came into the Dubliner, and he saw what was going on over here. It was pandemonium. It was mobs of people. It paid a weekly cash. Some of us paid taxes, I think. Did pretty good. It was all pretty good. And he was like, maybe I'll try this. And his father, John Kelly, would be one of the pillars of Irish traditional music. The great West Clare fiddler. He was one of those founding teachers for the Willie Clancy Week. I'm pretty sure John was still alive when the Willie Clancy Week started. So James is living down in Florida now, and I just learned so much from him. He's like, he would be defined as the fiddle player's fiddler. You know, a fiddler who plays fiddler. That's James. And he asked Dahi Sproul, and Dahi he was living in, I guess he was living in Dublin, and he was going to, he'd finished college, and I guess he was a little bit angry. He was from Derry and all this stuff. It's really interesting when he gets to it. It's just now that he's starting to talk about it, you know, all this idiotic, awful stuff, this murderous stuff with the British Army there in Derry. And so he was there. He saw some of this, but he's a totally not a violent person.
He's a pacifist. Yeah.
But he absolutely fell in love with this dad gag tuning, I'm not sure, but I think Artie McGlenn might have been the first of the great guitar accompanists. He was the first really, really, really great guitar player. Andy O'Brien knew his music inside out, and he was able to interpret it with the skill that he had acquired from watching other players. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but Artie was an unbelievably great guitar player with a natural love and respect for Irish traditional music. And what's his wife?
Well, ex-wife Nola Casey, and they still
they're
tour
still,
together.
they're still great friends.
Yeah.
Brilliant accompanist. So these would have been the people, kind of like the people that Dahi would have been listened to. So the three of them came out, and we heard them there in the Dubliner, and they went on to make 2 records. And Liz was and so the Irish tradition, we'd kind of had our time. We weren't a very good bar band. Everything worked really, really well for us there in the Dubliner. We were very, very lucky that the audience that we had on Capitol Hill at the time was as attuned as they were. It was just a magnificent thing that happened. Again, Myron with WGTB, and then National Council for the Traditionalists. We had tremendous support, you know. And then all of a sudden, we didn't. And we couldn't really take it. We weren't a concert group. We definitely were not travelers. We did not have that. We didn't have that. And so, and Liz is when the kids got a little bigger, and then she just said, why don't we'll start a group. And we did. And we did gigs in the Midwest, and we were figuring out how to, I'd figured out how to accompany Andy. Andy liked all these flat keys, you know. The great singers will sing in the key that suits the song and suits the voice. So we were able to come up with some really nice settings of tunes, and Liz and I were both composing tunes. Liz still is. Liz is a really prolific composer. So yeah, so we made the 2 records, and it was really good. We got to play a couple of the national folk festivals, and we played in Ireland. We played at the Ennistrad Festival. We got to do some really interesting things.
Excellent.
I was just up with Dahi. I just played a couple of gigs with Joni Madden, with the Pride of New York, which is my little band with Joni Madden and Brendan Dolan and Brian Conway. And Dahi joined us. He's such a great band man. But he had a really stellar career with Alton. So he really knows, he fits right into these lovely ensembles, yeah.
Yeah, and that Pride of New York just, again, shows that connection to the previous generation, because you think of Brian Conway learning from Andy McGann, and you learning from Sean McGlynn, and Joni learning from her father, Joe Madden. Yeah. Just such great connections there.
I guess the incredible thing about the record was we recorded it in a weekend in Joni's house. And so the idea was, well, what should we play first? And we all thought, we all thought of this. They call it the Dublin Reel now, the reel that Larry Radigan played. And so when we were starting
Galway Reel.
The Galway Reel. What did I say?
Dublin.
The Dublin Reel. So here, so we started playing. No, that's fine. So we started playing the tune, and there we go. Boy, Larry was just terrific. and we'd sit there and talk about it. Well, what would be good with that? Well, you know, why don't we put that one to James? Oh, that tune to James Campbell. Oh, we could. Oh, yeah, that's really good. Oh, what could we? Oh, okay. And we never really rehearsed the record. You know, we put them together, and it's great fun with. I got the chance to like butt heads there with Brendan. You know, well, how should you know? How do you see this, and what do you think we could, you know, lilting little chord ideas to him. And he's so fast. He never had to punch. He never had to edit anything that Brendan Dolan did on that record.
Amazing.
How do you like that, Brendan? Oh, it's fine.
So I'm afraid we're running low on time, so I would like to just ask Sean and Myron quickly to give a little comment about Billy and his playing and maybe the award that he's going to be picking up in a little bit.
Can I go first? Because I think it would be right to end with Sean being Billy's son. That'd be very valedictory. Is that okay, Sean?
Gives me time to think of something.
I'll defer to you defer to the age here. I've known Billy McComiskey coming on 40 years. I met him not long after he started playing the Dubliner, and he is a massive, massive musical influence on me, playing the humble, lowly Irish drum, but you need an education to play anything. And I had the best teacher alive, and that's Billy McComiskey. And I also feel, and I've said it to anyone who's ever asked, they go, what's it like playing with Billy McComiskey? I said, I'll tell you what it's like. I'd rather get on a stage with Billy unrehearsed and unprepared than with anyone else with 10 rehearsals. That's how sure I feel around Billy. It's just gonna be right. Not that we don't rehearse, not that we don't keep our game up, but I know that if he says something, it's gonna lay down just right. And it's gonna have integrity, it's gonna last, it's gonna be musically viable, and it might even be some fun. And Billy I have two wonderful sisters. I didn't happen to grow up with a brother, but I consider Billy a brother. So that's me and Billy McComiskey. I defer to Sean now.
Spot now.
Well, I could go down the road of being meaningful and profound, but I think probably just the simplest thing I can say about my father is thank you for teaching me and my brothers and my cousins all the good things that you taught us about music and the value. When I was listening to you talk about Sean McGlenn, I was kind of reminded of some of the things that you do in terms of like never taking money for teaching lessons, or it's all about passing it on. It's not about anything more than that. It's about keeping it going and sharing it, because that's the most important thing, and being open-minded about it. So thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And congratulations on the newest award, too. That's what Sean said.
Well, thank you all very much.
Steve, thank you for your time.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.